This morning we'll have a discussion about the SOC of the future. Before I get started, a few questions just to make sure I've got the right audience in the right room. How many people won at poker, blackjack, or craps last night? All right, all right, we are in Vegas, okay? So let's see if we can get the hands up a little bit more. How many people already have Splunk? There we go, all right, I know we can get some hand movement going. How many people already have a security operations center with dedicated SOC resources? All right, so we're gonna have a lot of good discussion probably at the end of this. So a little bit about who we are, then we'll talk about what we see, and then we'll talk about some of the challenges you're facing. How do we address them? How do we recommend other companies address them? And what does the SOC of the future start to look like as it evolves? So a little bit about Proficio. We are a managed detection and response company and a Splunk MSSP. We monitor through 3 of our global security operations centers, billions of events for hundreds of companies on a global perspective. We have well over 100 clients that are using Splunk in some way, shape, or form. And so we've been building out security operations centers for a number of years. Prior to starting Proficio in 2010, I was with a couple of other companies, and we built out security operations centers with some very large financial institutions. What we saw was there was a challenge in the industry that there just wasn't enough security talent, and companies were challenged with getting the real data out of the system itself and implementing the technology with people and process. And so we set out to create a security operations center that was fashioned after a Global 10 style security operations center company, and then we offer that as a shared service model. So we supplement very large organizations. We help to be the security operations center for mid-size and upper mid-size companies as well. And we'll talk a little bit about how we do that and what we do, but not too much about Proficio, more about what does this SOC look like today, what are the challenges, and where do we go in the future. So we are again, a managed detection and response company. We have 3 security operations centers in California, Singapore, and Barcelona. We follow a NIST model, or try to follow a NIST model for our framework and help our clients in that trajectory. As a MDR company, we are a security operations center as a service. Our primary focus is to have people that are monitoring the events, doing the investigation validation, triaging what to do about the actionable event, and then in many cases help them to do that first level of response containment, whether that's at the perimeter or at the endpoint. And then we also established some orchestration and automated response, and we've been doing that for a number of years, back when the analysts said, that's crazy, no one will allow you to automate the response, and we said they have to provide some automation, some way, shape, or form to keep up with the amount of attacks that they're getting and the response and quickness that they need to respond. So we'll talk a little bit about our experience in doing that, the results of doing that, and how you could probably begin to do that as well. So what does the SOC of the future look like? How many people have heard the autonomous SOC is coming? Good, so only a few. So I hear it a lot, it's like, I want an autonomous SOC. So what does the SOC of the future look like with an autonomous SOC? It's really, big data analytics machine, a single engineer and a dog. And you've probably already read the joke, but what's the engineer there for? To feed the dog. What's the dog there for? To bite the engineer if he starts to touch the machine. So that's not the reality that we see. We'll probably have colonies on Mars before we start to take the people out of the process. So the question is, how do we mix this technology with manual intervention to optimize what we're trying to do in our security operations centers? One of the challenges that many people face that we see all the time is the high number of indicators. So indicators then lead to notables or alerts, whatever you want to call it. And when we go into organizations that have Splunk like yourself, we often see it's pretty common to have 500 to 1,000 notables. And that is unmanageable. It's a lot of noise. And these slides will be available on Splunk's website. Or you can take pictures, or you can come over to our booth, either way. And so we see a high number of notables. And if you just do the math on that, let's say that it's not 500 notables, but let's say it's 100. It takes an analyst that's trained in a security operations center one day to investigate, validate, and triage probably 10 actionable, notable events that they got to figure out, is it real, is it not real, what do we do about it? So if you have 100, you have 10 people every day, 24/7, 7 days a week. You're looking at 20, 25 people in a security operations center. Most people can't sustain that. It's difficult to do that because one, it's hard to hire the people, train the people, and then keep the people. I mean, every time we come to an event like this, our engineers are, hey, you know, we're getting job offers every day, and I'm sure your teams and you are getting the same type of thing. There's just not enough people to help us in this, this journey. The other thing that we see is that companies are challenged with understanding when it is an actionable event. And so one of the challenges with that is that we see that companies don't have enough use cases. On average, we see a company will have about a dozen of effective use cases, and they're still generating a lot of activity. It's just not enough. If you start to click on and plug in all the security essentials, you just blow it up with noise. And then the tuning exercise is very difficult. We also see in a majority of companies that we go into, they don't have proper data modeling. So even though you have a lot of different security devices and you're collecting logs, you may not be getting the proper log data either out of the logs because you don't have it configured right at the source, or because you don't have it in a data model to publish in to your actionable use cases or your threat models. And so the biggest challenge that we see is, what questions do I ask the machine to find the relevant things that I need to take action on? And then if I see something that is interesting, and if you're really good at writing use cases, you probably are only going to get about 50% accuracy on that. That's where people come into the process of doing the investigation. How do you effectively do that investigation? How do you automate that is sort of the answer. So we'll talk a little bit about our experience with that environment as well. Then the next question is, and we kind of saw this in our evolution, we focused early on in our business in accuracy of detection. So we were maniacal about finding, you know, the accuracy because we developed hundreds of use cases, questions to ask the machine. And then we tuned those to each individual business, and we created business context so that we knew, hey, this was a finance server that had high critical value to the business, and this was the receptionist PC. This had command and control, and this had adware. Two very different events. It wasn't just an IP address, it wasn't just an event, it was something that had criticality to it. So once we got good at doing that, we could then triage the event and say, known abusive attacker permitted through firewall over a dangerous port, has control of this device in a dangerous or critical business segment, production or whatever that is. And our recommendation as the initial containment is, block the IP of the address of this attacker within 30 minutes or less at this firewall, and then do all the other normal stuff that we do. What we found was companies couldn't react fast enough because the threats were going really, really fast once somebody had that, you know, that control, you know, in your environment. They propagate, they drill in, they drill up, they go all over the place. And you've got an hour, maybe, you know, before it's critical and you can't find them. So what we found was teams that said, oh, you know, I'm in security, I don't manage the firewalls, I don't manage the endpoints. I have to create a ticket, have somebody go, make that change, and they do firewall changes, do a change management process on Saturdays. We're in deep weeds. And so the next thing was, oh, we have emergency response. My team will do 2 emergency responses per week with a 2 to 4 hour response time during business hours. That still, you know, we found wasn't good enough because we just see, you know, attackers just propagating through, you know, stuff expanding. So we said you got to automate that. So you have to be able to say, hey, if this occurs, automatically block this IP address, single IP address, this firewall right now. So we went down that path. People said you're crazy if you're not managing a firewall, you can't do it. 30 to 40% of our customers today do that, and they say turn up the volume, do more of it. So look at those types of things. We'll talk about that a little bit more as we go. The next thing that we saw as a challenge was that companies are challenged in the visibility of not just the events. When you get pretty good at the events, then you got to get really good at the response and orchestration and working with all your different operational groups and befriend them. The next challenge is at the upper level, all of a sudden it's like, hey, we got to go to a board meeting. And they want data, and they don't care about, you know, this hack or that company or that company. They want to know the metrics, you know, that are red, green, and blue. They want to know the charts. They want to know how fast are we responding, and how does that compare to my peers? How fast am I responding throughout the entire life cycle of an event? Hey, I can detect within 30 minutes or less, and I can acknowledge and triage within an hour or less. But then how long does it take me to contain that threat? Well, that's a different team. Do I manage and measure that? How long does it take me to resolve that particular device and get it back into action? Well, that's the server team, or that's somebody else. I don't know what that timing is. How long does it take me to go back and remediate? You know, so I change the control. Well, that's about 3 months. You know, so then you have to ask the question, you know, if my mean time to do all of this is X, Y, and Z, how does that compare to the industry? Am I doing good? Am I not doing good? And the answer is, I don't know. but somebody wants to know. You need business analytics for the security teams. So, another challenge that we face in the industry. So what do we do when we start down this journey? So we talked about a little bit of the challenges. We'll talk about a few more. When you go down a journey and you have a destination, what we always say, if you're not planning for success, you're planning for failure by default. And so you should understand what are your key objectives and your critical results that you want when you start to go down, hey, I'm going to look at something, make some changes, what's the future of the SOC? And how do we start to address things? So the number one goal that we always hear about is visibility. I need visibility to the events. I need visibility to threats. And I need them in an actionable format that is in my business context that I know what to do about this threat. I need the ability to detect things as quickly as possible early on in that kill chain so that it doesn't propagate into things that start to look like exfiltration, because then I got to start looking down the legal path. And nobody wants to do that. I need to look at something that most companies struggle to do with was, how do I categorize my assets? How do I categorize my people? How do I categorize and prioritize the criticality of an event? Is it different to have command and control or adware? Absolutely, we know that. But the response teams don't know that unless you put a Sev 1 or a criticality 10 on it. Whatever your response action is that's understood by the people that are responders outside of security, you need to be able to categorize and prioritize your events in this next generation SOC so that it goes through the process as quickly as possible. And then you need to measure it so you can understand where your gaps are and then address those gaps. There are not a lot of good tools to do that. There's not a lot of applications that are built for the security professionals. We got ServiceNow, but it doesn't measure that track. We need to be able to do that. Are these some of the challenges you guys are all facing? Anybody? Have you figured this out yet? Cool. So the next thing is we start to look at, let's categorize these into some, major categories. So one is technology. What technology is available today? What's coming down the future? Who do we have out there that has done it, has, broken it, has figured out where the gaps are, and then we can listen to them so that we don't have to, create that all over again. How do we address the skills gap? I mean, we all have the skills gap. I mean, I've got a team of recruiters. That's all they do is hire all day, every day. We're looking everywhere. We have a training program. And people are still, getting peeled out from time to time. We still don't have enough, to manage our growth. And I'm sure you're all on the same thing. And then what's the threat landscape, and how do we address that? So we start to look at the threat landscape, and you all know these things, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but the attack surface is getting broader. We're moving out into the cloud. We have tools for security in the cloud. They send us logs. We don't know how to interpret the logs sometimes. We got to go down to endpoints, and the endpoints aren't, just an operating system anymore. It's a device that's got something else going on to it. In some cases, we have medical devices. Don't touch that. So we have to put things around it with microsegmentation. And then all of a sudden, it's not even a device or it's a, physical thing anymore. It's containers. And how do we address containers? And they're going up and they're going down. It's like, okay, how many gigabytes a day do I need if it's like screaming up and then screaming back down? So it's challenging in figuring that out. It's also challenging sometimes with these slides. So the other thing that we look at in some of the challenges are, what about AI? Is AI effective or not effective? We'll give you some experience of what we see in the AI arena, and how do you plan for using AI? It's not just, hey, I used AI and machine learning to find an indicator. What do I do with that indicator? How do I map that into my playbook? How do I map that into categorizing that or correlating that with other events? And then we really want to be able to get visibility. Visibility is good for a threat, but we've got to look at what do we do with that threat. How do we categorize it? How do we prioritize it? And then how do we effectively begin to respond to those environments? So the technology leads us into a skills gap. We always seem to have enough people, it seems like, to manage the devices, but nobody wants to stare at the screen and interpret the things that are potentially false, and I have to validate them, and then I have to trace them back. When we started several years ago, when we looked at, hey, our job is to find an actionable event, it was, this device is compromised. Well, that was nice, and we send an alert to our customers and say, this device is compromised, and we recommend that you quarantine it off the network and then investigate the device. But what they really needed to know, what they really needed to do was, look at a MITRE ATT&CK, threat framework and a threat model. They said, device is compromised. Okay, what happened to it? Okay, what's malware? Okay, great. Create the hash, find out if that's someplace else. The next thing is, well, how did they get the malware on it? Oh, well, somebody clicked on a URL. Well, where did the URL come from? Oh, well, that was an email. Okay, well, where did the email come from? Oh, well, that was in a targeted phishing attack. So, the responsibility of the security team was to backstep that for root cause analysis, and then to forward that again to say, where did I miss? Okay, well, my endpoint protection platform didn't protect it from the malware. Somebody clicked on the URL, so my URL filter wasn't effective. Somehow I got through my email gateway, with the URL as well. Somehow I got a phishing attack that came through, and then somebody clicked on it. Where was the dog biting that person? Don't click on that. I got to go back and I got to do the training. So as security professionals in this SOC of the future, it's not just about the technology and the people, but it's the full process. How do we look at a single event, backtrace it up, figure out where we failed in multiple steps, and then remediate all of those steps? And if you don't have the visibility to that, then you may not know where those steps are, so you're just going to repeat this cycle all over again. And so we've seen that happen, where if you don't really look at the events at a broader picture and then drill it down in individual segments, then it's going to be repetitive. And you want to cut out all that repetitive stuff so you go from 1,000 events down to the 5 actionable ones that I can deal with on a daily basis. And these types of things help you to do that. Some other challenges that we see in technology and some of the advancements in technology is Splunk is a fantastic program and it's a fantastic data analytics engine. For us, some of the advantages of Splunk is it gives you tremendous visibility, but you have to kind of build in that visibility to your business context. You have to build in, searches. You have to build in workflow. There's some really cool tools that are available out there. You have to have people that understand how to use those tools. Sometimes they're tough to find. And it's not just a point in time. It's not a project. It's a continuous operation. We found that all the time. We'll bring in, or we used to bring in, professionals, hey, set this up for us and we'll be able to run it. Not really, because you always have to adapt the playbooks. You have to create scripts. You have to do a lot of things. And then for us, we have to adapt it to each individual business context. If it's not business context related, then it's just another event that people have to figure out what to do about. So some of the recommendations. And when I get done with a few more slides so we don't have death by PowerPoint, we'll open it up to Q&A as well. Some of the recommendations are related to threat information. So one of the things that we look at and has been very helpful for us is not to just look at a use case from a data source perspective. That was kind of generation 1. We said, hey, I've got this list of my data sources, perimeter firewall, IDS, WAF, whatever, web server. Then I've got, all these other data sources that are across the core, and then I've got the endpoint, and then I've got some cloud data sources. What we looked at is threat models. So when you start to build out use cases that are effective, you look at a threat model that will look at the tactics, the techniques that an attacker will use, and the procedures they use to actually propagate through your information and your network to get the data. And so when you build a detection mechanism, you shouldn't be looking at a single event, but you should be looking at multiple events in sequence and think of your use cases in that model. It's been very helpful for us. The other model that has been helpful for us is understanding how, once you find an event, how do you do that investigation in that search on the back end? And so tying together in, how do I do the search? There's ways to do some of these things with some SOAR technology so that you can bring in virus total and all these things for your analysts to be more effective. But then how do you actually tie that into a link that gives somebody else the ability to do something at stage 2? So in most security operations centers, well, most of them, will just have a handful of people. They're doing tier 1 through tier 3. As you build up the larger size of a security operations center, you'll have tier 1 people doing the monitoring, first validation, first investigation. Then it'll go to a security engineer, do a deeper dive into what happened. And then you'll have threat hunters, that are looking for the things that do not turn over, in a use case or an indicator. They're looking for the anomalies, through the visibility of screens that you set up. So use cases are great. Dashboards are better for threat hunting. And then machine learning's looking for the things out in the wild that are, never been seen, that builds up a new indicator. One of the things that we go in and we have it's difficult for us to do as an outside provider, and we can see that it's difficult for companies to do on their own, is to provide that categorization of assets. And so, by that, it's not related truly to data models, but we'll go in and we'll say, everybody's interested in, PII. Healthcare is interested in PHI. Everybody's interested in, GDPR. A lot of people are interested in, some type of, privacy. Where is it? Where is my PHI? What are my medical devices? What are my critical devices? What are my non-critical devices? Who are my privileged users? Who are my administrators? Who's going to get the email, that says, hey, can you do a funds transfer? So being able to create a business contextual model so that you can categorize assets, create some type of asset, mapping or zone mapping, and then create some type of privileged user mapping helps you in doing quicker response. Because the faster you can respond, the less you have to do investigation down the train because the attack is going to propagate. So if I know these are critical devices in a critical zone, then I can quarantine those off. I can begin to look at micro-segmentation and segmenting off certain networks, which we see happening in manufacturing when all of a sudden you've got old NT machines that still get configure on them. You can't upgrade the machine, so you got to segment them. And so we see that understanding your asset models, your zone models, your privileged user models allows you to start looking at anomalies in a different way. You can say, hey, do I use Tor in my environment? Absolutely not, except these two administrators over here, they kind of use it. Never, but sometimes probably, people in the room are using it. Who's allowed remote access? Who's allowed to get in from a VPN? How do we create anomalies and baselines? Baselines are not machine learning, but they're very helpful. But I got to create, models of people and policy and process so that I can begin to build use cases and tune my use cases around those things. So it's one of the steps that is very helpful as you begin to go down the triage and response path. How many people actually do asset categorization? Okay, so there's actually a few. Not complete? How hard was it? Yeah, very hard, absolutely. It's one of the things where we ask and people are like, I don't have it, I don't know if I can get there. There's ways you can set up to do mapping and baselining. You can actually pull some of your privileged users out of your domain controllers, which is kind of cool. What are some of the other recommendations? Hiring, that's, if I look at my challenges, it's like sometimes I can figure out the technology challenges. I can just keep beating my head into the wall and figure new things out that we've done wrong and fix them, at different places. The best place to learn is by coming to these types of events and talking to people one-on-one about what they did. But the challenge that's really hard is hiring people and keeping those people. There's just not enough out there. So where have we gone? So we're in San Diego, so we get veterans all the time. We actually have a program where we teach military personnel before they come out of service and their spouses about security. And then they go out into the security market. We have internships, and we bring them in as well. We go to universities. Universities now have security programs. They have masters in security programs. Go teach at those things. We have people that go teach classes, and then they help students to learn, and then we bring students in. We put them through our training program. It's like if I can't hire them all, at least they're going out into the community. Help the community. It really helps us all. The other thing is we try and hire, 50% of the world is women. And we don't have enough women in the high-tech community, in the security community. We try and hire and promote women getting into this field as much as humanly possible. One, they don't procrastinate like most of us guys. Two, they get right to the point. And three, they're very loyal and they don't hop around on jobs a lot. So I can't tell you how much we try to do that. The other thing is we're never going to hire enough people. So if you can't populate with people, you got to automate. And then the question is, can I really get to that autonomous SOC? The answer is no. With automation, you're really striving to get 30 to 40%, automation through different types of technology. And what we do, one of the best things that we did was we integrated ServiceNow. And so we've got a lot of different components to all the things we do. And we got, a threat intelligence platform, and we got Splunk, and we got SOAR, we got automated response, we got all these things. And I could unplug any of them. But at ServiceNow, it's like across all of that. And we took some of our data scientists and we pointed them at the ServiceNow data, and it gave us information about the efficacy of our use cases, which ones were good, which ones were not good. It also allowed us, from our perspective, to look at our clients, and we stack ranked them. Who's our most expensive clients? Who's our least expensive clients? Who's our best? Who's our worst? And it kind of, got us to to the realization the best customer for us is the one that engages the alert and does something about it. The worst is somebody that doesn't do anything about it. So we get a repetitive investigation, and then we got to investigate all the way down the stream. So it's almost 10 to 1 if somebody doesn't respond quickly to an event in the early stage. It's the same for you. If you can respond early in the kill chain, or the tactics, as they don't spread through their techniques, then you're going to be much, much better off in reducing those volumes of alerts that you get. The last thing, on some recommendations is there are companies like us throughout there in the pavilion that can help you. So if you look at things like, gosh, we're in the DC area and I can't hire people in DC. Move your SOC to Raleigh. Move your SOC to Kansas City. We're in San Diego. There's a couple of security operations centers in San Diego, and it's a great place for, bringing in new talent that we're training. We also realize we can't do 24/7 in the US. I can't hire people to work the midnight shift and keep them. So we have security operations centers in Singapore. It's fantastic for us. We went to Barcelona, great tapas and cava, and great people. And so it's been a great experience for us. In Singapore, everybody has 2 years of service. Everybody speaks English as the business language. They're very loyal. They're very dedicated, and they work long hours, and they're pretty sharp. They all have university degrees. Great location for security talent if you haven't investigated that. So look for people that help you to co-manage, to take over some of the resources, help you to get started, or even be your security operations center. Some other recommendations. Wow, should I go with Elastic? Should I stick with Splunk? So we've looked at both. We've used both in different ways, in different shapes, and different forms. I got to tell you, Splunk has everything you need. It has an ecosystem and a community and people. It's a big data analytics engine with the tools on managing big data analytics. It manages a tool. It thinks about security of the platform itself. Elastic has a lot of capabilities, but it's not kind of baked yet. And so you've got to have the people in the process to actually manage and build those things on top of it. If you have the team and people that can start to do that, maybe it'll supplement what you're doing in some other areas. But just know that open source is interesting, but it's not baked fully yet with all the things you need for an enterprise class solution unless you have people that can enable that. There are some things having down, but they don't have the ecosystem that Splunk does. People in process, again, plan for the future. Before you start down the road of implementation and all of a sudden you got 1,000 notables, figure out, okay, what are some of the use cases I'm going to apply? Where do I get those? How do I modify those? Can I get my asset and zone categorization before I start moving down this path? How am I going to effectively respond? So if I have this investigation for this use case, what's my playbook to say, okay, I need this outside data, that outside data, some threat intelligence over here, and then I need to train somebody on how to work through that model. So look at things like modern attack frameworks and how you can do the investigation. So what is our approach? We use global security operations centers. We run 2 shifts in Singapore, 2 shifts in Barcelona, extended shift in the US. Allows us to have people that are highly skilled and qualified at all times. Allows us to do it in a cost-effective way. Singapore is about 40% less to run a security operations center than the US. Barcelona is about half the cost, just as kind of a quick number. Our rates of turnover in Singapore, less than 10%. Barcelona, about 12%. US, a little bit higher than that. So that's kind of the rates. And losing a person that you've trained up is painful. Because then you've got to go find somebody and bring them into your model and bring them into your experience. One of the things that we've done for the SOC of the future to keep people is if you have somebody that's staring at a screen all day, every day doing investigations, we found burnout's about 12 months. So you need to promote within 12 to 18 months to typically engineering level 2, engineering level 3, content developer, SIM engineer, endpoint, response person. So that's about the time frame that we see. 12 to 18 months is where you've got to typically promote somebody and give them something else to look at and something else to do. So just a bit of advice there. Log enrichment, big challenge for us. One of the things we did was we looked at a gap analysis for all of our customers. Because for us, we were afraid of a miss. A miss is, I didn't see that until it was too late. So we looked at what are all the different threat vectors. There's hundreds of different threat vectors. You can get lists from MITRE and others. Create it, and there's like, I don't know, 300 or 400 brute force attack, code injection, cross-site scripting, whatever it is. And then we map that to where do we see those? Perimeter, your core, your endpoint, or your cloud. And then we said, what do I have for security devices that control that? So I've got a perimeter-based firewall, intrusion detection, email gateway. I've got web application firewall, all those types of things. And then from there, we said, where do we have the gaps? Where do I not have visibility? Where am I going to miss? And so we said, okay, if somebody doesn't have a web application firewall and he's got these applications exposed, they're vulnerable to an attack. If I don't get the data from that, I won't see it. If I don't get web server log data, then I may not see it until it propagates past that. And so understanding where you have gaps in your security for collecting logs to then fill your use cases is something we highly recommend, so that you know where you can get hit and how long before you would actually see it. Because at the end of the day, the managers up here don't really care. All they want to know is you're protected. If we have a miss, if something happens, they don't want to say I didn't have visibility to it. They just want to know why not. The other thing that we highly recommend is all logs are not created equal. And so when you look at logs, you have to say, oh, I'm getting the firewall logs. Well, I'm just getting the inbound blocks and not the inbound allows. The outbound blocks and not the outbound allows, or reverse of that. So you have to look at getting a good, rich set of log data from the log sources themselves. And so that takes a little bit of looking. It takes a lot of investigating the actual log sources at the source itself. SOAR technology. SOAR technology is getting better, and it's getting better. We still see it's about 30% reduction in SOC analyst time if you implement it in the proper way. But you have to implement it completely, which means that you have to implement it so that you have the playbook on your types of investigations, on your type of use cases that help you to orchestrate the investigation. And then if you can automate the response, start slowly, and then turn up the volume. For us, response starting slowly was we created things to do what we call active defense, which allows us to, if I see an attacker scan the network, come back in and do a port probe or going at my higher level open ports, then we block them every time. Single block IP address, and you can do it by using an API or a web service subscription. But what it does is it lets the attackers know, and at least the perimeter, I'm watching and I'm reacting, and so you see the attack volume go down. One of the things you should also look at is what is my attack volume and where is it coming from, and how do I address that? The other thing we recommend is not only just tactically looking at my compromises, but start to stack those up to look at what's causing those. What are the top 5 reasons I'm getting compromises on a monthly basis? Are my compromises going up in volume? Do I now have 35 a month, and last month I had 30? Or are they going down? They're going down maybe because I'm looking at what's causing them and changing or remediating my controls. But look at the data. One of the things we did that's very helpful is we said we started to give those trend lines month over month, quarter over quarter, and then look at what's causing it, give them the drill down, which is actually business analytics for the security professional, so that they can start to make those changes. We then said, hey, out of all of our customers, what's the trend line in your industry and your peers, and gave you the comparative analysis. So it's like, hey, I'm at 30 compromises a month. Is that really bad, or is it not too bad? So we can give you that analysis in real time on a screen. Machine learning. We do machine learning, have done machine learning. It was not very good 2 years ago. It's getting a lot better. You have to continuously tune and turn it. I mean, we were looking at things that were, giving us hundreds of indicators in machine learning, and 99% of them were false. But the one that we dug through was real interesting, because we didn't see it in any other way. And so what we had to do is start to correlate the events to reduce the false positives to other stuff, and then provide a workflow to do the investigation. Painful, expensive, and was something that wasn't good enough a couple years ago. It's getting better. There's some really good platforms out there. We use Pattern X, and Pattern X has a lot of machine learning models already built and developed that are available for the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So you can look at, I'm looking for email phishing. I'm looking for some user behavior. And then what are the logs that I need to get that from different sources? So they've got a lot of that already available, and we're using a lot of it. We create our own in the different engines. The other one that we use for some of our customers is Vectra AI, really nice platform as well. And so they're here as well, but that platform is really good, and it does a lot of the work that you would have to do on your own, tuning different things. So they're always getting it better and better, which is helping us to use that as just another indicator to then start and kick off the playbook to do the investigation. How many people are using AI? Cool. I would be willing to bet a year from now, 50% of the people will be raising their hand. And AI is an interesting term. A lot of it's just baselining, but a lot of it's also machine learning. Let me go. Next one. So I talked a little bit about MITRE ATT&CK frameworks. One of the things we've done in the last year, we used to use kill chain. We still use kill chain to evaluate our use cases. But now we're looking at more techniques and tactics, not just how does a threat propagate. We then had to realize, wow, it's not just about the use case, but it's also about how we do the investigation. As I said before, our investigation was focused on the compromise or the attack. Here's the alert, go. Now it's more focused on how do we get there? What are the techniques and tactics? And then the other thing we start to do is we start to look at what's the severity of the event. Is it exfiltration or is it just somebody that's mapping or mining our LinkedIn profiles? And then where is the risk? What is the risk? In your incident response plan, you probably have a checklist of things that you're checking off. If you can automate your systems to actually put that information into some type of a ticket, where you push the ticket into your ticketing system so the responder can see, oh, this is a SEV 1, the risk is a 4 out of 5, it's at this location, and this is what I do about it, you're going to cut 50% out of their time to actually get a response and make their life a lot easier, so they're going to be willing to do that. We've seen it happen. It's very effective, and we're trying to do more and more of it. The other thing, the client would be just your information, but you need to know what's the impact of an event at an asset at this time. And then that helps you to prioritize what to do about it. And then look at the history. As you look at searching, create something that says, what can I look at on the history of the device, history of the zone, history of the attacker, so that I can say, hey, we were supposed to block this, we were supposed to change that, it didn't work, it wasn't effective, we got to go back to the well. And then look at how you can take a piece of information and correlate it to a bunch more information, either in the Splunk platform, outside of it, ingest other things within that, and create more advanced correlation rules. And then we always say you need to have a guide. You need to know where you're going and provide that actionable information to the responders themselves. And it might be that responder A is contain the threat at the firewall, block this IP address. Responder B is quarantine the device off the network, investigate the hash and the malware. Responder C is, put this back into service, notify someone. Responder D is, educate the user not to click on that. And so you're going to have a sequence of who responds, not just put it back into service, but stop it. Stop it from happening again. Makes your life a lot better, reduces the number of attacks you get, and your attack surface. These all sound like common sense things, but they're really hard to do. They're really hard to manage. It's what we do every day. So the other thing is developing use cases. We've developed use cases in 3 or 4 different ways, and we've kind of gotten as much as we can to this side, which is, what's the business reason that we're creating the use case? Is it something that we're trying to, prioritize over here that we're looking for? So we start to look at, the business side of why we're creating use cases. Then we start to look at who's going to attack me, who are the threat actors, and what are their techniques and tactics. And so we start to map how do we discover that in this business area with business context. Because what we want to look at is where we want to end up. We want to end up protecting the most relevant assets in the organization. We need to know what those are, so let's build that into the use case up front. The next thing is, where do we detect it, or where do we protect it? And then what is the data that's coming from that? Not just a log, but what's inside the log, and how do we publish that into a CIM or a data model to then get up into the use cases? So sounds easy, not as easy as possible. We created something called a hunting and detection engine that allowed us to model use cases around MITRE ATT&CK framework and threat models to be able to look at this information as we publish it into the use cases to detect threats, and then all the way to the playbook on how we investigate and ultimately respond. One of the things we also did that's been very effective is we enriched the data from all these different elements, and we put it into an email. Because let's face it, hey, it's great to have a mobile device, it's great to have a workstation, but people respond to emails and they want the information in the email. Not everyone's going to have access, in all your different operations groups to Splunk, or they're not going to get to Splunk, or they're not going to use Splunk. So pop it in an email, put it into your ticket inside of ServiceNow. If you format the email correctly, it can go into whatever your ticketing system is, but have the right data. Say, if I've got a checklist of Is this a critical device? Is it a privileged user? Is it in my data center? Is it in my manufacturing zone? Is it a SEV1? Put that data up front so somebody knows how fast they have to respond. Is my hair on fire? Did I throw it to help desk to remediate on Friday? Where's the zone? What is the link back to my search so that I can continue the search for the responder? And then, what is the recommendation on what I do about it? So as much as you can enrich the ticket, enrich the information in the email, again, you're cutting cycles and time and you're automating the process. So it's not just about what's in Splunk, but how do you get it to your operations teams to make it more effective? Automated response. Man, I'm telling you, so 5 years ago when we started doing this, the analyst said, Gartner said, you guys are crazy. No one's going to let you touch their firewall. No one's going to ever allow you to quarantine a device off the network. You are insane. And we're like, there's no other way. You get accuracy detection and business context, tell them what to do. They can't move fast enough. And here's the security guy going, I don't have any control. I've lost it all. I can just tell people. We're like, look, give some control back. So what we did is we created some automation, said, hey, we can create scripts into these APIs into the firewalls. I don't have to manage it, but I can just commit an IP address, single IP address. Never on this list of blocking, but just one. 30 days later, I'll come in and take it back out. So, at the end of the year, you don't have 1,000 block IP addresses in your firewall anyplace. It works like clockwork. So it basically can commit within a minute, and it doesn't interfere with anybody doing any firewall changes anyplace. And so our customers typically will have 10 to 15 of these blocks going on every single day. It's amazing how much it happens. So we block people that are attacking from the outside or devices that are compromised communicating on the outside. The next thing that happened was, our security manager said, hey, that's pretty cool. But there's some of those, use cases that are gray areas where I want to make a determination that's not just automatically block. And so what we did with that was we said, hey, let's do a push the button. We'll send you an alert. You send us back an acknowledge and block. We push the button, blocks it. So we gave the security team control back over the firewalls again. They don't have to manage it. They don't have us managing. It's just block that IP address, please. We started to do other things. Hey, you know what? Quarantine that device off the network. So we can begin to do those types of things. And it actually works pretty cool. So we have some demos and stuff we can show you if you need. The next thing we did is we said, hey, the security manager needs something to do the analytics of what is security. So we started to build applications inside of Splunk, and we offer them through a cloud-based application to say, hey, let's categorize all of your attacks that are happening all the time and your compromises into attacks, compromises, policy violations, insider threat. And then let's look at the volume of those, the trends of those, when do they occur? Am I really just happening once a month or on Saturdays? What's causing that? And what are the use cases that are driving that? So I can effectively start to drill down the number of compromises that I have. Then we started to say, hey, you know what? We want our customers to respond, engage every alert, contain the threat so that this over here, I don't have to investigate 16 times in the next 3 days because nothing was done about it. So data is an amazing thing. When you start to give people data, they can start to react. They can start to react beyond just their operating group, and they can start to react with all the operating groups. So we followed a NIST model, and we said, hey, we will look at mean time to detect, which is on us as the SOC. Then mean time to acknowledge, which is basically still the SOC in many cases, where you have to say, okay, acknowledge, yes, this is a valid actionable item, and this is who's supposed to respond to it. So create the ticket to respond. The next is outside of our control typically, containment. The firewall, the desktop, the end user, somebody else somewhere, server team, help desk, has got to do something for that containment. How long does it take them? I don't know. Did they engage it? I don't know. What is our target? I think I've got a target. It's an hour, it's 2 hours, whatever it is. The next is I got to recover, bring the system back online, bring it back to the user, the web server's back up. That's great, but how do I prevent that from happening again? I need to remediate it. So how long did it take me to detect, acknowledge, contain, resolve, remediate? Collect that information. Use that information. If you're working with us, we can help you to look at what are the industry standards because we collect it for all of our customers. We do bidirectional integration with whatever their ticketing system is, and so we have some metrics on that. What does the SOC of the future actually look like? So I'm almost done. So we architect Splunk at the top, threat intelligence. Threat intelligence is internal threat intelligence, playbooks, external threat intelligence, operationalized so that you take the threat feed and you apply it to use cases. We also look at how to interact with other areas. One is you have to have a team dedicated to creating use cases in business context that look at the entire life cycle of an event, on how you investigate it, how you respond to it. We also look at how do you respond to things. Look at SOAR platforms. If you have somebody that can really dig into it, they're very effective, about 30% reduction in cost of your analyst. And that's it. Any questions really quick? Yes?
So, Splunk ES is not multi-tenant. So how do you handle that?
So we work in two models. One is a full cloud-based model where we can have a dedicated Splunk. The other model is somebody has Splunk and we can layer our technology on top of it. And then from a business analytics tier, we have a multi-tenant Splunk so that every one of our customers uses our business analytics, which is not ES, but it's an application we built on just top of Splunk. So we've enabled Splunk to be a multi-tenant environment. Splunk actually is doing some things to help other customers do that as well. So if you have multiple customers within your framework, there's some new technologies that will help that, or we can guide you in how to do that. Other questions? Yes?
Yeah, hey, just was wondering, so you said there SOCs traditionally like understaffed in a lot of places you see. What would you say is like an appropriate level of staff? Like, yes, like how many notables come in a day? Or do you have a metric for saying like, oh, we need more people here?
Yeah, so quick metric is it takes one person can get through about 10 investigations per shift. So, it depends on how many gigabytes a day, what the average volume of alerts or notables are, and how effective those are. About 50% of your alerts or notables will probably be false, which means you have to go through an investigation to get them down to the actionable ones, and then you have another team that responds to the actionable events. So, and then to create a total SOC, you need 12 people, minimum. That's bare bones, and you probably need more like 16. Sorry. Any other questions? I'm over at Proficio booth, so you can always catch me there. My team be happy to answer any questions, give you a demo, talk to you offline. Yes. Thanks.